Hey everybody. Today we're going to be reading Animal Farm, Chapter 3. So, without further ado, let's get ready to jump in. How they toiled and sweated to get the hay in. But their efforts were rewarded, for the harvest was an even bigger success than they had hoped. Sometimes the work was hard. The implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals, and it was a great drawback that no animal was able to use any tool that involved standing on his hind legs. But the pigs were so clever that they could think of a way around every difficulty. As for the horses, they knew every inch of the field, and in fact understood the business of mowing and raking far better than Jones and his men had ever done. Now, the pigs did not actually work, but rather directed and supervised the others. With their superior knowledge, it was natural that they should assume the leadership. Boxer and Clover would harness themselves to the cutter, or the horse rake. No bits and reins were needed in these days, of course. And tramp steadily round and round the field with a pig walking behind and calling out, "Gee up, comrade!" or "Whoa back, comrade!" as the case might be. And every animal down to the humblest worked at turning the hay and brakes. In the end, they finished the harvest in 2 days less time than it had usually taken Jones and his men. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest that the farm had ever seen. There was no wastage whatever, and the hens and ducks, with their sharp eyes, had gathered up the very last stalk, and not an animal on the farm had stolen so much as a mouthful. All through the summer, the work of the farm went like clockwork. The animals were happy, as they had never conceived it possible to be. Every mouthful of food was an acute positive pleasure, now that it was truly their own food, produced by themselves and for themselves, not doled out to them by a grudging master. With the worthless, parasitical human beings gone, there was more for everyone to eat. There was more leisure, too. Inexperienced though the animals were, they met with many difficulties, for instance. Later in the year, when they harvested the corn, they had to tread it out in the ancient style and blow away the chaff with their breath. Since the farm possessed no threshing machine, but the pigs with their cleverness and Boxer with his tremendous muscles always pulled them through. Boxer was the admiration of everybody. He had been a hard worker even in Jones's time, but now he seemed more like 3 horses than one. There were days when the entire work of the farm seemed to rest on his mighty shoulders. From morning to night, he was pushing and pulling, always at the spot where the work was the hardest. He had made an arrangement with one of the cockerels to call him in the mornings half an hour earlier than anyone else, and would put in some volunteer labor at wherever seemed to be the most needed. Before the regular's day's work began, his answer to every problem, every setback was, "I will work harder," which he had adopted as a personal motto. But everyone worked according to his capacity. The hens and ducks, for instance, saved 5 bushels of corn at the harvest by gathering up stray grains. Nobody stole, nobody grumbled over his rations. The quarreling and biting and jealousy, which had been normal features of life in the old days, had almost completely disappeared. Nobody shirked, or well, almost nobody. Molly, it was true, was not good at getting up in the mornings, and had a way of leaving off work early on the grounds that there was a stone in her hoof. And the behavior of the cat was somewhat peculiar. It was soon noticed that when there was work to be done, the cat could never be found. She would vanish for hours on end and then reappear at meal times or in the evening after work was over, almost as though nothing had happened. But she always made such excellent excuses and purred so affectionately that it was impossible not to believe in her good intentions. Old Benjamin, the donkey, seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. He did his work in the same slow, obstinate way as he had done it in Jones's time, never shirking, but never volunteering for extra work either. About the rebellion and its results, he would express no opinion. Whenever he was asked whether or not he was happier now that Jones was gone, he would say only that donkeys live a long time. None of you has ever seen a dead donkey. and the others had to be content with this cryptic answer. On Sundays there was no work, breakfast was an hour later than usual, and after breakfast there was a ceremony which was observed every week without fail. First came the hoisting of the flag. Snowball had found in the harness room an old green tablecloth of Mrs. Jones's, and had painted on it a hoof and horn in white. This was run up at the flagstaff in the farmhouse garden every Sunday and morning. The flag was green, Snowball explained, to represent the green fields of England, while hoof and horn signified the future republic of the animals which would arise when the human race had finally been overthrown. After the hoisting of the flag, all the animals trooped into the big barn for a general assembly, which was known as the meeting. Here, the work of the coming week was planned, and resolutions were put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forward the resolutions. The other animals, they understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolutions of their own. Snowball and Napoleon were by far the most active in the debates, but it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestion either of them made, the other could be counted on to oppose it. Even when it was resolved, a thing that maybe no one could object to in itself, to set aside a small paddock behind the orchard as a home of rest for animals who were past work, there was a stormy debate over the correct retiring age for each class of animal. The meeting always ended with the singing of Beasts of England, and then the afternoon was given up to recreation. The pigs had set aside the harness room as a headquarters for themselves. Here in the evenings they studied blacksmithing, carpentering, and other necessary arts from books which they had brought out of the farmhouse. Snowball also busied himself with organizing the other animals into what he called animal committees, and he was indefatigable at this. He formed the egg production committee for the hens, the clean tail leagues for the cows, the wild comrades re-education committee. The object of this was to tame the rats and the rabbits. The whiter wool movement for the sheep, and various others. Besides instituting classes in reading and writing, on the whole these projects were a complete failure. The attempt to tame the wild creatures, for instance, broke down almost immediately, as they continued to behave very much as before. When treated with generosity, they simply took advantage of it. The cat joined the re-education committee and was very active in it for some days. She was seen one day, sitting on a roof, talking to some sparrows who were just out of her reach. She was telling them that all of the animals are now comrades, and that any sparrow who chose could come and perch on her paw. But the sparrows kept their distance. The reading and writing classes, however, were a great success. By autumn, almost every animal on the farm was literate in some degree. As for the pigs, they could already read and write perfectly. The dogs learned to read fairly well, but were not interested in reading anything except for the 7 Commandments. Muriel the goat could read somewhat better than the dogs, and sometimes used to read to the others in the evening from scraps of newspaper which she found on the rubbish heap. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty so far as he knew. He said, "There was nothing worth reading." Clover learnt the whole alphabet, but could not put words together, but Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. He would trace out A, B, C, D in the dust with his great hoof, and then he would stand staring at the letters with his ears back, sometimes shaking his forelock, trying with all his might to remember what came next, but never succeeding. On several occasions he did learn E, F, G, and H, but by the time he knew them, it was always discovered that he'd forgotten A, B, C, and D. Finally, he decided to be content with the first 4 letters, and used to write them out once or twice every day to refresh his memory. Molly refused to learn anything but the 6 letters which spelt her own name. She would form these very neatly out of pieces of twig, and would decorate them with a flower or two, and walk around them admiring them. But none of the other animals on the farm could get further than the letter A. It was also found that the stupider animals, such as sheep, hens, and ducks, were unable to even learn the 7 Commandments by heart. After much thought, Snowball declared that the 7 Commandments could, in effect, be reduced to a single maxim, namely, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. This, he said, contained the essential principle of animalism. Whoever had thoroughly grasped it would be safe from human influences. The birds at first objected, since it seemed to them that they also had 2 legs, but Snowball proved to them that this was not so. "A bird's wings, comrades," he said, "is an organ of propulsion, not of manipulation. It should therefore be regarded as a leg. The distinguishing mark of man is the hand, the instrument with which he does all of his mischief." The birds did not understand Snowball's long words, but they accepted his explanation, and all the humbler animals set to work to learn the new maxim by heart. "4 legs good, 2 legs bad" was inscribed on the end wall of the barn above the 7 commandments, and in bigger letters. When they had got it once by heart, the sheep developed a great liking for this maxim, and often, as they lay in the field, they would all start bleating, "4 legs good, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad," and keep it up for hours on end, never getting tired of it. Napoleon took no interest in Snowball's committees. He said that the education of the young was more important than could be anything that could be done for those who had already grown up. It had happened that Jessie and Bluebell had both whelped soon after the hay harvest, giving birth between them to 9 sturdy puppies. As soon as they were weaned, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, saying that he would make himself responsible for their education. He took them up to a loft, which could only be reached by a ladder from the harness room, and there he kept them in such seclusion that the rest of the farm soon forgot their existence. The mystery of where the milk went was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into the pigs' mash. The early apples were now ripening, and the grass of the orchard was littered with windfalls. The animals had assumed as a matter of course that these would be shared out equally. One day, however, the order went forth that all the windfalls were to be collected and brought to the harness room for the use of the pigs. At this, some of the other animals murmured, but it was no use. All of the pigs were in full agreement on this point, and even Snowball and Napoleon. Squealer was sent to make the necessary explanations to the others. "Comrades," he cried, "you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us pigs actually dislike milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole object in taking these things is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, and this has been proven by science, comrades, contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of a pig. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of the farm depend on us. Day and night we are watching over your welfare. It is for your sake that we drink the milk and eat those apples. Do you know what would happen if we pigs failed in our duty? Jones would come back. Yes, Jones would come back." "Surely, comrades," cried Squealer almost pleadingly, skipping from side to side and whisking his tail. "Surely there is no one among you who wants to see Jones come back?" Now, if there was one thing the animals were completely certain of, it was that they did not want Jones back. So, when it was put to them in this light, they had no more to say. The importance of keeping the pigs in good health was all too obvious. So it was agreed without further argument that the milk and the windfall apples would be reserved for the pigs alone. Alright, so that wraps up chapter 3. So, with this chapter, there were a few things to consider. For one thing, Squealer's argument about the milk and the apples. Does he make a good argument? Would Jones really be in danger of coming back if the pigs had to share the milk and apples? Ladies and gentlemen, one of the things you want to think about as you read this is what George Orwell's purpose is. Why did he write this book? What is the point that he's ultimately trying to make, and what is he trying to show? Remember our studies on North Korea, as well as your readings about the Russian Revolution that was assigned through Common Lit. So far, is there anything that Animal Farm reminds you of in regard to those historical details? Next week, we'll have another reading on Russia through through Common Lit about Joseph Stalin. But before we get there, think about some of the things that the farm is engaged in so far, trying to educate the various members in the principles of animalism, as well as sort of the routines of the farm. Do they remind you of anything? Do they seem similar to what we've read and looked at so far? Anyway, that's all I've got for you for this video. Stay tuned for Chapter 4 of Animal Farm.